Good morning. Before I forget, I'm going to do this first. My parents have asked me to invite all of you back to their house at the conclusion of this service. If you need directions, I guess you can see one of us when it's over. It is hard to sum up the over 91 years of my grandmother's life. One way might be to think about all the historical moments she lived through, including the crash of the stock market, which began the Great Depression, the start and end of World War II, the Civil Rights Movement, a man walking on the moon, the resignation of a president, the Berlin Wall both going up and coming down, along with the invention of television, the computer, the cell phone. The list is almost endless. But witnessing history does not fully measure a person's life. In the musical Rent, which those of you who know me know is not one of my favorites, they do ask one very good question. How do you measure a life? The answer they give is the same word I kept coming back to, and one which I think represents my grandmother perfectly. The word is love. My grandmother had an enormous heart and had an amazing amount of love to give. Whenever she would talk on the phone, she always signed off with, "I love you." And it was not a catchphrase to her. She truly meant it when she said it. She loved my grandfather for over 58 years. But their getting together was a rather amazing confluence of events. My grandmother once told my Aunt Anne the only reason she went on the first date with my grandfather was because someone else had stood her up. A friend offered to fix her up with Ken. On top of that, Grandpa was running late for that first date and asked if they could meet at the movie theater instead of picking her up at home. Those of you who knew my great-grandmother, Nana Hamilton, are always amazed that my grandmother was allowed to meet my grandfather at the movie theater for that first encounter and not be picked up at the house. After that, he kept coming, all the way from Somerville, and always to the house first. And she just must have known, as their courting even survived a moment in the movie theater when Grandpa fell asleep during the movie, and Gran asked for his handkerchief numerous times, and he finally stood up and yelled, "You're driving me crazy!" They moved past that moment and created countless moments together. She wondered how she was going to manage after he was gone, but she managed for 14 years, finding new friends and making a new life for herself. She would manage to come to Massachusetts many times during those 14 years, and I have a vivid memory of her being in Hull during a winter snowstorm. She and her friend Marie were upstairs from me, staying in the condo. With the snow whipping around outside, she called on the phone and asked, "Do you think Schooners will stay open?" Schooners was one of her favorite restaurants when she would visit, and sure enough, we trekked over in the middle of the storm for dinner. On the way home, while the three of us were trying to maneuver around a snowbank, she fell backwards into the snowbank. I leaped over to help, only to find my grandmother sitting in the snow, laughing so hard she couldn't stand up. She was never one to take herself too seriously, and I think recognized how crazy it was we had gone out during a near blizzard just so she could have fish for dinner. This adventurous side also sent my grandparents on many trips to tropical paradises, to Las Vegas, or to closer to home destinations in Maine, New Hampshire, and down the Cape. When my Uncle Gary went into the Navy, he asked her to look after his car, a 1970 lime green Plymouth Duster with a 4-barrel carburetor and a 340 cubic inch engine. And as my dad described to me, she was a suburban mother of 3, tooling around town in a lime green muscle car. And she loved every minute of it. This kind of want for adventure, even in cars, never seemed to have left her. When I visited in Orlando, not long after my grandfather had passed away, I was able to rent a convertible for the week I was there. On the first day, we needed to go to the store, and she insisted I drive us in the convertible, top down, and during the drive, she instructed me to turn on some music so people would notice that hip grandmother cruising around in a convertible. We did get a few head turns as we pulled up to Walmart. There are so many memories of love she had for all of her family. Some of my earliest memories are gatherings at their house on Northdale Road on Sunday afternoons for Sunday dinner. There always seemed to be a whole bunch of us gathered in the summer enjoying the pool, or in the winter just enjoying each other with the Bruins game on the television. My grandmother would be working in the kitchen, cooking up a storm, and loved having everyone at the house. As the family grew and expanded, the table would also expand. Enough food and enough love for everyone. This sentiment has never changed, as my Aunt Anne mentioned to me how much she loved her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren, and she was so excited about the youngest addition brought into the family by Monica and Chris. When her brother died at such an early age, she did everything she could to fill the void for the family left behind. She always wanted to make people feel better, and often acted as the peacemaker during any type of conflict. She was often the voice of reason, a voice of experience, a voice of love for those around her. She was the only one, and I mean the only one, who could tell my grandfather he was wrong and not get a rebuke. She knew when to push an issue and when to quietly and gently nudge. She loved going out and loved being social. She loved having people around and interacting with her own social group. I'm pretty convinced she had a more active social life than I have ever had. And even on the day she left us, she had put on her blue eyeshadow, as she did every day, had gone to a communion service, to Sunday dinner, a piano concert, had played Name That Tune, getting all 15 songs correct. She had been to see a movie that night. On her final day, she did more than I did all of last week. She had worried when she began having trouble walking and getting around that she would also have trouble being social. But as was typical of her life, she continued to do the things that she enjoyed and to see the people she loved. Having trouble walking did not stop her. She also loved her crossword puzzles and knew so many things because of all the puzzles she completed. There have been times I thought about giving up teaching my college students and just handing out books of New York Times crossword puzzles. Based on her abilities and her mindset at the age of 91, I really sometimes wonder if my students would be better off. My parents had been to Florida just a few weeks before, and my dad relayed a story to me about her correcting him about the day of a holiday and mail delivery the day after. And my Aunt Anne said she would often be corrected by my grandmother and then comment, "Who's the one in assisted living?" She always worried about being a burden to others and hated to ask anything of anyone, even those whose job it was to provide help. She most likely would be worried about all the time people are taking today to say goodbye. She was loved by all those that she encountered, from the staff at the Orlando Heart Center to one of her favorite nurses, Judith, who worked evenings and had just gone home and gotten into bed when she received the call that my grandmother had passed away. She got up and went back to sit with my grandmother until the undertaker came. No matter who she encountered, people always realized how special she was. When we would talk, she often would lament about some of her aches and pains, and she would always tell me, "Gregory, don't ever get old." And yet, I don't know anyone who grew older with more grace and dignity than my grandmother did. It was more than just the eyeshadow, or her newfound hobbies of painting and ceramics, or even her crossword puzzles. To say she loved life is an understatement. her love for all of us, and her love for all those around her made every day a new adventure, right up until the very last. But it may be fair to say she loved her faith in God the most. And with that in mind, verses from the first chapter of Corinthians may be the most appropriate way to sum up my grandmother's 91 years. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. History may measure the passage of time, but it is love with which we measure a life. And for my grandmother, that measurement was genuinely infinite.